Discipline is the currency of the wealthy, and I don't mean that metaphorically in some shallow self-help sense. I mean it in the deepest psychological and economic reality that governs your life, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not. Money, at its core, is stored time. It is compressed effort. It is the measurable residue of responsibility voluntarily adopted and competently executed across months, years, and sometimes decades. And discipline is the mechanism that allows that compression to occur. Without discipline, your attention fragments, your desires scatter, your impulses dominate, and whatever potential you possess dissolves into momentary pleasures and chronic anxiety. In North America, in places like the United States and Canada, we live in economies of staggering opportunity, systems so advanced that a single individual with a laptop and clarity of aim can create value at a scale unimaginable even 50 years ago. Yet the tragedy is this: opportunity amplifies weakness just as efficiently as it rewards strength. If you lack discipline, abundance becomes a curse. You overspend because credit is easy. You drift because entertainment is infinite. You rationalize because everyone around you is equally distracted. And then you say, you have a money problem, but you do not have a money problem. You have a hierarchy problem. You have not placed your long-term well-being above your short-term comfort. You have not decided that your future self is worthy of protection. The wealthy and I don't merely mean those with high incomes, but those with durable, stable, compounding assets understand something fundamental. Every dollar saved is a vote for future sovereignty. Every hour invested in skill acquisition is a brick in the architecture of independence. Every temptation resisted is a psychological muscle strengthened. Discipline is not restriction, it is alignment. It is the voluntary narrowing of focus so that your energy is not wasted in 10 trivial directions, but concentrated in one meaningful pursuit. And that concentration, over time, transforms ordinary effort into extraordinary leverage. That is the beginning of wealth. Now, if discipline is the currency of the wealthy, then you must understand that its exchange rate is measured in sacrifice, and that is precisely why so few people accumulate it. Sacrifice is not a fashionable word in a culture intoxicated by immediacy. We are surrounded by signals that whisper and sometimes scream that you deserve comfort now, that postponement is deprivation, that limitation is oppression. But psychologically speaking, that is infantile. The child reaches for what is shiny and sweet. The adult forgoes what is easy in service of what is meaningful. And wealth, real wealth, is the byproduct of meaning pursued over time. When you refuse to spend impulsively, when you choose to invest instead of consume, when you decide to learn a difficult skill after a long day rather than collapse. Into passive entertainment, you are engaging in an act of faith in your future self. You are saying that the person you will become in 5 or 10 years is worth more than the fleeting comfort you could purchase tonight. That is not merely financial strategy, it is moral hierarchy. And the market, ruthless as it is, rewards that hierarchy with astonishing consistency. Compounding, for example, is not just a financial principle, it is a moral one. Small disciplined actions, repeated daily, accumulate in ways that seem almost miraculous. A modest but consistent investment strategy, whether through equities, entrepreneurship, or skill building, leverages time itself as an ally. Time punishes chaos, but rewards order. And discipline is the act of imposing order voluntarily. The tragedy is that most people attempt to increase income without first increasing self-regulation. They want higher returns without higher standards. They seek opportunity without structure. But income without discipline produces lifestyle inflation, debt, and anxiety. You see it everywhere. Raises absorbed by consumption, bonuses converted into liabilities. Talent squandered because the individual cannot tolerate boredom long enough to master a craft. The wealthy are not immune to temptation. They have simply constructed systems that reduce the power of temptation. They automate investments. They budget with clarity. They track metrics. They tell the truth about their weaknesses and design guardrails accordingly. That is not obsessive, it is strategic. And strategy is what separates those who are merely busy from those who are building something that endures. Say next paragraph when you're ready to continue. And here is where the discussion becomes genuinely uncomfortable, because discipline is not merely about external behavior, it is about identity. If you see yourself as someone who struggles with money, you will unconsciously organize your life in a manner that confirms that narrative. Human beings are story-driven creatures. We do not simply act, we enact the characters we believe ourselves to be. If your internal story is that you are unlucky, disadvantaged, perpetually behind, then every financial setback becomes evidence, and every opportunity becomes suspicious. But if you instead adopt the identity of a builder, someone who constructs stability brick by brick, then setbacks become data, not verdicts. In high-performance economies like Australia, the United States, or Canada, markets are dynamic, volatile, and intensely competitive. That volatility does not disappear. It is the environment itself. So the question is not whether uncertainty exists, it always will, but whether your character can withstand it. Discipline stabilizes perception. It allows you to look at a declining portfolio and refrain from panic, to see a promising opportunity and evaluate it rationally rather than euphorically. It teaches you to delay emotional reaction long enough for reason to intervene. And that capacity, the ability to subordinate impulse to principle, is rare. Most people oscillate between fear and greed. They buy because others are buying. They sell because others are selling. They upgrade their lifestyle because their peers have upgraded theirs. They are not directing their financial lives. They are reacting to social cues. But discipline creates internal governance. It establishes a constitution within the psyche. You decide in advance how much you will invest, how much you will spend, what risks you will tolerate, what standards you will uphold. And then, crucially, you abide by those decisions, even when emotion protests. That is sovereignty. That is adulthood. And sovereignty, over time, becomes wealth not merely in dollars, but in optionality, in peace of mind, in the quiet confidence that you are capable of navigating complexity without collapsing into chaos. Say next paragraph when you're ready to continue. But discipline, properly understood, is not a narrow obsession with frugality. It is the deliberate organization of your entire life around a compelling aim. Because without an aim, discipline decays into resentment. If you do not know what you are building toward, every sacrifice feels arbitrary. Every delayed purchase feels like deprivation. Every long hour of study feels pointless. And so people abandon the path, not because they are incapable, but because they are aimless. Wealth, in a sophisticated economy, is a byproduct of value creation, and value creation requires direction. You must ask yourself a question that is far more terrifying than, how do I make more money? The real question is, what problem am I willing to become competent enough to solve? Because markets reward solved problems. They reward competence. They reward reliability under pressure. In countries like the United States and Canada, where technological innovation and capital flow at extraordinary speed, the barrier to entry in many industries is lower than it has ever been, but the barrier to excellence remains high. And excellence is disciplined repetition in a single domain long after the novelty has faded. It is the willingness to endure the boredom of mastery. That is where most people fail. They confuse excitement with purpose. They chase trends. They pivot endlessly. They consume motivational content, but avoid sustained effort. Yet, the compounding effect of focused competence is staggering. If you devote 5 years, truly devote, not casually dabble to mastering a skill that is scarce and valuable, you separate yourself from the majority who abandon the path after 6 months. That separation becomes leverage. Leverage becomes income. Income, managed with discipline, becomes assets. Assets, held with patience, become freedom. But notice the sequence. It begins not with money, but with responsibility voluntarily assumed. You decide that you will carry a load that others avoid. You decide that you will tell the truth about your current incompetence and then rectify it systematically. That requires humility. It requires patience. It requires the courage to appear foolish in the short term so that you may become formidable in the long term. And when you integrate that orientation into your financial life, when your spending reflects your values, when your investments reflect your long-term vision, When your daily habits reflect your declared priorities, something remarkable happens. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop oscillating between indulgence and guilt. You become integrated. And integrated individuals are powerful because their energy is not divided against itself. Say next paragraph when you're ready to continue. And perhaps the most profound dimension of discipline, the one that is almost never discussed in superficial financial advice, is that it confronts you with the reality of your own limitation and dares you to transcend it voluntarily. You are finite. Your time is finite. Your energy is finite. Your attention, most tragically of all, is finite. In a culture saturated with infinite scrolling, perpetual consumption, and algorithmically engineered distraction, your attention has become the primary battleground. If you cannot govern it, you cannot build wealth, because wealth requires sustained concentration over extended periods of time. It requires the capacity to remain committed when results are invisible. And here is the brutal truth. The market does not pay you for your intentions. It pays you for your reliability. It rewards the person who shows up consistently, who executes competently, who refines incrementally, who resists the urge to abandon the process when applause is absent. Discipline, therefore, is not merely about saying no to luxuries. It is about saying no to fragmentation. It is about constructing a life in which your calendar reflects your priorities, your expenditures reflect your strategy, and your habits reflect your stated ambitions. In high-income societies such as the United States, Canada, and Australia, the infrastructure for upward mobility exists at a scale unprecedented in human history. Access to information, capital markets, digital platforms, and global customers is democratized to a degree that previous generations could scarcely imagine. But democratized opportunity does not eliminate hierarchy, it intensifies it. Those who discipline themselves rise rapidly. Those who do not are buried beneath their own undirected impulses. And so the ultimate question is not whether the system is perfect. It is not, but whether you are willing to become the sort of person who can operate effectively within complexity. Because if you cultivate discipline deeply enough, it ceases to feel like constraint and begins to feel like power. You walk into uncertainty with structure. You face volatility with preparation. You encounter temptation with clarity. And over time, as years accumulate and your investments compound financially, intellectually, psychologically, you discover that discipline has indeed functioned as currency. It has purchased not merely assets, but autonomy. Not merely income, but stability. Not merely status, but self-respect. And self-respect, grounded in earned competence and consistent responsibility, is the foundation upon which all sustainable wealth is built. And yet, even after all of that, you will be tempted to negotiate with yourself, to whisper subtle excuses that sound reasonable on the surface, but are corrosive underneath, because the psyche has an extraordinary capacity for self-deception when comfort is at stake. You will say that you deserve a break, that the system is unfair, that others had advantages you did not, that one deviation from your plan does not matter. And individually, perhaps, it does not. But character is not forged in grand, dramatic gestures. It is shaped in the micro-decisions that no one else sees. Every time you violate a commitment you made to yourself, you weaken the internal contract that makes discipline possible. You teach yourself that your word is flexible. And if your word to yourself is unreliable, your financial life will mirror that instability. Budgets will dissolve. Investment plans will drift. Ambitions will shrink to accommodate inconsistency. But when you keep your promises to yourself, especially the small, inconvenient ones, you accumulate something far more valuable than immediate pleasure. You accumulate trust in your own agency, and that trust is transformative. It allows you to take calculated risks because you know you will not abandon the process at the first sign of discomfort. It allows you to invest patiently because you are not governed by panic. It allows you to scale responsibility because you have evidence grounded in lived experience that you can carry weight without collapsing. In sophisticated capital markets, like those in the United States or Canada, volatility is inevitable. Downturns are cyclical and uncertainty is constant. The disciplined individual does not interpret these realities as personal attacks. He or she interprets them as structural features of the game. And instead of reacting emotionally, the disciplined person prepares structurally, diversifying assets, maintaining liquidity, continuing to build scarce and valuable skills, strengthening networks, refining judgment. That preparation is invisible to the casual observer, but over a decade, it produces a divergence so dramatic that it appears miraculous from the outside. It is not miraculous. It is compounded integrity. Discipline is integrity extended through time. It is the refusal to betray your future for the sake of your present. And when you truly grasp that, when you internalize that your financial destiny is less about secret strategies and more about sustained self-governance, you stop searching for shortcuts. You stop envying sudden success. You turn inward and ask a far more difficult question. Who must I become so that wealth, if it arrives, does not corrupt me, but instead amplifies my capacity to contribute? Because ultimately, the highest expression of discipline is not accumulation for its own sake. It is the construction of a stable foundation from which you can serve your family, your community, and the broader society with competence and generosity. And that is when discipline ceases to be merely the currency of the wealthy. It becomes the architecture of a life that is orderly, meaningful, and genuinely prosperous.